Hey guys, this is Omer from MMOs.com. Another quick weekly recap of all major MMO news announced for the week ending April 6, 2020. This is episode number 239 of the recap, and the first of news this week comes from Ascent Infinite Realm, which has actually officially changed its name now to Elyon Ascent Infinite Realm, or just Elyon for short. And besides the new name change, which is odd, we finally have some news regarding this game. Now, closed beta for the highly anticipated steampunk-esque MMORPG is set to begin on April 11th in South Korea. Now, the game is leaning more fantasy now than steampunk, whereas it was more steampunk themed before. The game's combat system has also been redesigned a bit to have a greater emphasis on skill-based free action combat versus traditional tab targeting. Now, this one is still a bit of an oddball because it was set to release like a year or so ago, and the studio kind of went radio silent until now. But it's great to see the game finally making progress towards release. We also know that the game will be published by Kakao Games now. And with the Korean closed beta finally happening, I suspect the West release date is still pretty far away. We might get a closed beta by the end of the year in the West if all goes well, but that's just my guess. But yeah, the game's finally making some progress though. I kind of liked Air better than Elyon, but I think they changed it to Elyon because Air was like very generic, and you search Air on Google, you don't really find anything about video games, you just find like what Air is. So I think they just changed the name of the game to make it more discoverable on Google. Next up, with Phantasy Star Online 2 beta underway for Xbox, the game finally announced that the PSO2 for the game is on track for PC release later this spring, which means we'll finally be able to play it on the PC in the next few months in English. While we don't have an exact release date for the announcement does suggest that it'll be available sometime in May, or at the latest at least. Now, this one is definitely an oldie, but it's still a surprisingly popular game in Japan, and seems to be doing quite well on Xbox so far as well. For those that never played PSO2, the core gameplay is similar to other instance dungeon persistent hub style games, a la Vindictus and Dragon's Nest, but it's Japanese developed, and there really aren't too many Japanese developed MMORPGs out in here in the West, so it's definitely a point of differentiation for the game. Again, the game came out in Japan back in 2012, and it's finally just coming out here in the West, so better late than never, I guess. Up next, Valorant, a free-to-play shooter from Riot Games, begins closed beta testing on April 7th, and there's been a lot of hype behind this one. The hype isn't surprising though, because it's really the first big new game out of Riot Games since League of Legends. We did of course get the card game Legends of Runeterra, but it's clear that Valorant is a much bigger release, and a ton of big streamers who have played the game's alpha has been praising it on Twitch and Twitter, and been hyping up the game quite a bit. Now I'm looking forward to trying this one, as it looks like a mix of CSGO and Overwatch, with a much greater emphasis on individual skill, and it clearly leans much more towards CSGO, as players tend to die pretty quickly, like a single headshot will kill players, whereas in Overwatch and other hero shooters, people don't die as quickly. And given how popular CSGO has been since release and kind of how resilient the game has been over the years, I'm not surprised to see Riot Games kind of copy CSGO and add some their own flair to it by adding heroes. I have a feeling that Valorant will do really well because it's going to be a lot like CSGO, and CSGO has been very successful over the years. Speaking of shooters, the MMORPG/shooter hybrid Bloodlines of Prima, which is an indie title, finally left early access on Steam, and it also launched its 1.0 update earlier this last week. This one used to be a buy-to-play title, but went free-to-play back in February. Now, Bloodlines of Prima builds itself as a free-to-play FPS/MMORPG hybrid. Unfortunately, though, despite being free-to-play, the game is basically dead. It's averaging just 1.3 players on any given time, with a peak of 7 players over the last 30 days. So trying to make a MMORPG, especially an FPS MMORPG hybrid, is probably not something an indie studio wants to try. Now, indie studios always have a hard time making games, of course, because they don't have the marketing or development money behind them, and trying to make an MMORPG, which is probably the most complex style game you can make, is just generally not a good idea. But if you're curious, the game is free to play on Steam if you want to check it out. Also on the FPS front, Amazon Game Studios, which has been in operations now since 2016, but doesn't have a released game just yet, is set to launch Crucible sometime in May. While it's basically taken a backseat to New World lately, which is set to launch on May 26th, Crucible will also be launching in the same month, apparently, of May. So Amazon Game Studios will have 2 games out later in May. Now, Crucible is a 13-player game where 12 players fight it out Battle Royale style, while the 13th player is called the Game Master, who runs interference via Twitch integration. Now, the concept of a 13th player kind of just mixing things up with Twitch integration sounds really cool, and actually makes a lot of sense for Amazon because they, of course, own Twitch, so integrating gameplay with Twitch is a really cool concept, but we'll see how it actually ends up panning out. So yeah, we'll have 2 games coming out from Amazon Game Studios later in May, and we'll see if any of them are any good. Their first game, Breakaway, was kind of a flop, so we'll see how these other 2 games do. Next up, Elder Scrolls Online is talking up its upcoming Draymore update, which is its next big update. It's slated to hit the game in just a few months. It's currently set to launch on May 18th for PC and June 2nd for consoles. The new chapter opens up the frigid northern and western areas of Skyrim, which features iconic locations familiar to anyone who played Skyrim. The most recent playable demo gives players access to the new Antiquity system and changes to the Vampire skill tree. Now, the Antiquity system is basically encourages players to explore Tamriel and learn the game's lore through treasure hunts and various minigames. Now, it rewards them with mount pieces, housing items, and epic gear. It's really a smart way to get players to re-explore old content in the game and make it more relevant again, which is something I think every MMORPG needs to do. Gotta take all that old content, which nobody does anymore, and make it relevant by forcing players or encouraging players to explore them with new minigames and new challenges. The game's Greymore prologue quest already in the game right now if you want to get started on those, but again, the update itself is launching on May 18th-ish on the PC. Oh, and ESO is also holding a free-to-play event until April 13th, so if you've never played ESO, now's a good time to check it out for free. Up next, EVE Online launches Invasion Chapter 2 update, today also called Eclipse, and is a second quadrant update for the year. The update features a new story content, a new live in-game event called The Hunt, some big balance changes, visual updates, new and mysterious ships and weapons, and more. As with all previous EVE updates and expansions, this update is of course free. While EVE Online is an oldie now, having launched back in 2003, it's still incredibly popular, averaging 25,000 players online at any given time over the last month, with its player base actually jumping in the last month or so, with everybody staying home and playing video games. So EVE is not just the only game doing well, basically every MMORPG, every online game is a big spike in player base because people have a lot of free time nowadays. Now, speaking of sci-fi MMOs, the sci-fi MMORTS Starborne, after 5 years of alpha testing, finally launched into open beta this last week, and it looks to be bringing a unique experience to the MMO world. And given that we really haven't seen any real MMOs in the RTS world, it's kind of interesting. The only real RTS games we've seen in the MMO world have been pay-to-win browser games or pay-to-win mobile games, so it's cool to see a PC-focused MMO with RTS elements, and that's Starborne. If you want to check it out, of course, it is free to play, so if you're curious, give it a try. I'm moving right along. Astro Creation announced that their first alpha test for the MMORPG will be starting in May. This announcement shouldn't be too surprising, as the studio previewed Alpha 1 last week, and now we finally have a release date for the Alpha 1 that other people can actually start playing the game. And given that Chronicles of Lyria basically crashed and shut down last week, it's good to see one of these Kickstarter MMORPGs making some progress. I'm still not too optimistic on Astro Creation, but at least they're making some kind of progress, and I'm curious what the actual MMORPG gameplay will look like. I've seen the videos, but I do want to kind of try it myself. I've always been skeptical about Astro Creation, especially after the Battle Royale game mode, but I am curious to see what the open world MMORPG will look like when it finally comes out. I mean, this is just Alpha 1. It's still far from a complete game, though. Next and last of news this week is a small update from Sea of Thieves, which is launching on Steam with full Windows 10 and Xbox One crossplay in the coming weeks. I do like the fact that the game is crossplay compatible, but more importantly, I do like the game is coming on Steam, because previously Sea of Thieves was available just through the Windows Store, and people have been raging on the internet about Epic Game Store versus Steam, but honestly, nothing even comes close to how awful the Windows Game Store is. It's just infinitely worse than both Steam and Epic Game Store, so I'm glad to see this one coming out on Steam. Anyway guys, that's it for MMO news this week. I'll see you guys next week. Later guys.